Just to remind you what we did, because you really want. So this industry depends on the company. So if you go to JP Morgan, they have a fairly significant training program because they bring in hundreds of people every year. Pretty intense, where they show you how to do valuations. We're going to do some of their models in this class. But a lot of firms, there's zero training. You walk in, my first security analysis job, they told me nothing. You just figure out what you did in class during your college career. So you got to figure out something. So I'm giving you stuff that if you do that, I'm showing you, you'd be in good shape. This works. So what do? We brought in companies in an industry. Depends on the industry. So this particular one, anything related to food, we brought that into their category. I brought in market cap just as a quick way to see, is this a major player or a small player? So when we're deleting companies, we had the idea of, well, we'll delete companies, but we don't want to delete companies with over 10 billion. So we're trying to get rid of those outliers. So that's a good approach you could do. Then we're going to do things related to turnover and sales growth, which is really, really, really important. Here's where you can get the most industry specific is on turnover. We didn't in this model because when you have that many companies, it's hard to get specific because you get a lot of NAs. But at UTSA, we use revenue per employee, which is a really popular one. You'll see when you do one of your later papers, you'll pick a more specific one to your industry. This industry, we actually decided to put an inventory turn because we knew for this particular industry, inventory was extremely important. And it worked really well. Everybody had data. So we didn't have a problem with having to delete companies. And then working capital management, that's the last one over turnover. Really, really important. We're going to talk a lot about that because your accounting classes taught it wrong. We're going to have to fix that. Then you get into margin. That's the bottom line growth. That's been a big issue lately because of inflation and supply chain management types of things. But that was pretty important. We brought some things in there. Return on capital, we could have gone different directions here. We could have brought in return on invested capital. I did ATO times net margin, which gives you something similar to that. I like EVA. A few of the models actually used EVA in the model, which I was happy to see. On risk, I tend to just be fine just using the Bloomberg formula because it has everything else in it. But I did bring debt numbers in. That's where we saw a lot of NAs, how to kick them out. You do get negative numbers here. Negative numbers probably mean that their debt is negative. How can debt be negative? Because net debt is debt minus cash. So there are some firms that have negative debt. You could say it could be negative because EBITDA is negative, but they'll put it in if the denominator is negative, they'll give you an NA. So negative number just means they don't have much debt. I put these last two in here, and almost no model picked volatility, but I was really shocked at how many models put short interest in there. I don't trust that. That seems kind of strange. The head of the finance department, the previous one before Baynot, he didn't like us having that in the model at all. I put it in there just because for tech stocks, it makes sense. But we had other industries. I can't remember if this one had it or not. So on this one, we did price to book and EV to sales. And then you can look at the weighting. They had about 19% in turnover, 13% in margin. You would have expected more in margin. Quite a bit, 37% in return on capital. And then they had short interest in there that I didn't understand. And then what really bothered me with this industry is it should have been EV to sales, but it put all the allocation of EV on price to book. I went back, I didn't tell them, I went back and reran the model and forced it to do EV to sales. And it gave me a slightly different list of companies, not much, but the companies it took out were the ones that were really good and ones that put in the really bad ones. So it's actually, this is the better model, but I did test it just to see. Retail should always be EV to sales, but some reason this model went with price to book. Don't know why, kind of strange. And then they got a pretty good R squared, 89%. And then they graphed it. You can see pretty good fix, but we threw out the outliers. I don't think there's any problem throwing out outliers if they're small companies because small companies are usually valued on something radically different than others. So using the Russell 3000, we're getting some companies that are more just kind of gee whiz. Wow, I'm interested. There's a small company coming in, but if we got to kick them out, we'll kick them out to preserve the model. So pretty tight fit. Here's a really bad company down here. We ranked at 8th, and it's the 3rd most expensive. Here's a really good company, ranked 4th, is the 7th most expensive. And so you have pretty quickly, and you can build one of these in 10, 15, 20 minutes once you have the baseline. It took us more time because I was talking and explaining things. But you can build, once you get one built, it's easy to transfer it to another one. There are some industries you can get really, really specific. I mentioned some of y'all airlines. You can do really specific airline data and you can get a really tight model, but you don't have that many companies, but it works really, really well. So hopefully you feel comfortable with this, but I do recommend you watch the YouTube videos and go to the FSC and build one of these on your own, because I was moving pretty fast. Some teams were faster than others. Quincy was driving his team. I could tell he's an Excel user, so we were zooming through. Others Excel is like, so it took longer for some and others, but you got to get faster on Excel. Students tell me, Professor, you're so fast on Excel. And if you're one of those that think that, you're in really bad shape, because I'm very slow in Excel. I'm a dinosaur in Excel. So if you think the dinosaur is fast, you're not where you need to be. You got to be a lot faster. It was easy when I graduated from college. All you had to do is learn Excel, and that was it. Now you got to learn Excel. You got to learn AI. You got to learn Python. You got to learn macros. You got to learn all this extra stuff. You got to learn Kappa IQ, Bloomberg. You got to learn all these other things, and you got to get faster and faster and faster. You will get faster on the job because you're sitting there 50 hours a week doing nothing but Excel all day. You'll get faster, but you may not get the job if you're not fast enough now, because they may give you an Excel quiz and they're going to watch how many times you touch that mouse. And whenever you touch the mouse, you get negative points. So you got to get faster. You don't need to stress yourself out, but going in the FSC and building one of these models and just watching how often you use the mouse, that's a good way to do it. You're learning something and getting your Excel skills better. Were there any comments or questions on this? Y'all think y'all got some good companies? Feel good about the companies? Some of the teams, I said, you can change the criteria. So the criteria is, this is my bias. The criteria is high quality companies that are at least well valued or cheap. I think that's not a bad, it's a value approach to investing. I think that's the way to do it. Some teams change these numbers around because they really want to do Netflix or whatever. You say, well, if I just change it from -1 to 0, it comes in and I can do it. For screening models, what you're trying to do is take this massive number of companies and get down to something you can work with. So you're just looking for some good companies. And so the models, this is not, you wouldn't go out and buy these 8 companies, but you need to do a lot more analysis. But it gives you 8 companies that are interesting that you can look at. And each one of you are picking one. And at the end of the semester, your team will get back together again. And of your 3 or 4 stocks, you're going to decide which ones are buys, which ones are holds, which ones are sells. If you have 4 companies, you can have 4 sells, you can have 4 buys, you can have 2 buys, 2 sells. It depends on what you find in the other papers, but you should have a good group of companies to start with. All right. So today what I want to do is get you ready for paper 2. So I've already told y'all, Porter's 5 Forces, you can get it from the library. Oh, I should have practiced this in advance because, boy, I'm not good at this. They keep changing their website. But if you go into the library or databases, let's see if it's still there even. Wow, there's a lot of INs. So in Merchant Online, Investex will do a Porter's 5 Forces. The problem is this model is really, really hard to use. You can click on industry analysis. I think it's under reports. Let's see what are you doing. Oh, they have much higher. So they have the Porter's type of analysis in there. I can't remember how to do it. I'll figure it out and show y'all next class. But this website is radically different. What I usually do is I type in my company, and then the report comes up and you have a link to the industry analysis that that company is in. I think that's the best way. That way you know you have a good link to your company versus looking for the industry. And so they do Porter's 5 Forces. I think it's not the greatest writing in the world. The ones I've read, I think they're a little weak, but they're out there. The other recommendation is ChatGPT or Copilot, and just ask for Porter's 5 Forces for your industry. Be real careful in the industry. So for the consumer staples that doing retail stores, we said Porter's 5 Forces for discount stores. So we get it clear. You can't say Porter's 5 Forces for consumer staples. That's just too wide. So find something specific to your industry. I think I did that with each one of your groups when we found a really good Porter's. I think ChatGPT is written far better than Merchant Online, which is kind of amazing. And it's possible ChatGPT is actually stealing from Merchant Online as part of their approach. So what do you do with that? You don't copy and paste. You use it as research, give you some ideas. What you need to do pretty quickly with your team is decide how you're going to break up the second paper, right? You're done with the first project. The second project's by far the hardest. So you have to break it up and you got to make it equal. Remember, a big part of your grade is what your team members say you contributed. So what I would recommend, we'll look at maybe a couple example papers, give you some idea of the sections. You're going to break up the sections. If you have fewer team members, we'll give you fewer sections, and then go out there and research. If you're doing supply power, you can certainly, if you see something on buyer power looks very interesting, copy and paste that and send it over to your team member doing buyer power. So you're always looking out for each other, but you focus in on supplier power. So we'll get into that, and I'll show you some tricks that you can do for each industry. But definitely you can use Merchant Online. You can use AI. Those are the primary places that give you a good Porter's 5 Forces. You can just Google it if you want to just Google it. I think the problem with Googling it is you might get some high school kids paper, and you don't always know the quality of those. So, and I can't say the quality on ChatGPT, except for the ones I read were well written up to the point that I read them. So Merchant Online is a major one you want to use. So let's tonight just think theoretically what is Porter's 5 Forces. I'm going to focus on economic moats. That's more paper 3, but I'm going to cover Porter's 5 Forces. So here's the areas that there's Porter right there. I should have brought his book with his autograph, but maybe I'll do it next class. So there's Michael Porter. I don't know how old he is. He's got to be getting up there, my word. $47. What is that? 53 plus 22. So he's in his 70s. Pretty amazing guy. I mean, he's all over. My life insurance class is going to talk about him because he's written a lot on healthcare reform, but he's been around there for quite some time. There's his 5 Forces. He has a book on competitive advantage, and he's written all kinds of stuff. I don't know what kind of person he is, but my guess is he can probably wear you out if you could sit next to him on a plane, because he goes into such incredible detail. He likes the details, and his philosophy is the details is what matter. This is not high level fluff stuff. It's the details. So he goes in incredible detail. I mean, his competitive advantage book is that thick, and every page is just more and more. You get tired reading it. It's really, really tough reading. But his biggest things concerned to us are the Porter's 5 Forces and the value chain. Here's the Porter 5 Forces. Porter 5 Forces also have generic strategies. We want to talk about both of those in your first paper, and we'll talk about how you bring in the generic strategies in the value chain analysis. So when you start working on paper 3, that's when you can do Porter's value chain management analysis for your company. You do that in ChatGPT. I don't think you'll find that on Merchant Online. They don't do a value chain management, but you can certainly do that on ChatGPT. You can Google it as well. So Porter's 5 Forces we'll get into here. But let me talk to value chain management as first. Essentially what they're asking is, what does this firm do that makes them valuable? Where are they competitive? Where are they better than everybody else? And if you look at the pieces, You have the inbound, so raw materials. I think inbound, and remember this when we're talking about supply chain or supply power, inbound includes employees. So your inbound is you hire people that are going to work for you. So that's part of your inbound, but mainly raw materials. You have operations. What are you going to do with those raw materials to create something? So if you're hiring employees and you're doing services, how do you hire those employees and what do those employees do to create those services? Then you have outbound. How do you get the product to the customer? Marketing and sales. What does that process look like? And then service. After you've given the product, for some companies, oh man, I've been hearing a lot of them reading business breakdowns. A lot of companies, they almost lose money on the product and all their profit is on the service after the fact. You'll see that sometimes like a Boeing or someone like that. You know, let's get the check to them and then we're going to charge them a fortune for service. Those are the main items that they have. And then you have the support. You have your infrastructure, human resources. How do they hire and fire people? Your technology department and your procurement. And that's going to affect your profitability, your margins. So value chain determines the cost that the firm has, which is going to hit your margins, but it's also going to affect your depreciation, which is going to affect your sales. So Porter will argue, I don't know if he always argues this, but to differentiate yourself, it's going to cost you money. But it's going to cost you money that should add the sales. So the question is, where are you spending your money to add value to the customer so you can make money, more money off of them? Are they doing stuff that's not really that valuable and it's a waste of money? So this whole process has implications for cost and differentiation. Think about differentiation in terms of the customer. So differentiation, does what you do reduce cost for the buyer? Makes their life easier. Or does it improve the buyer's performance? It makes their business better. Or does it just make your customer happier? That's that kind of affinity. They like wearing your product because it makes them feel rich or special. So you're going to ask in terms of the value chain, what does this value chain do for the customer? And then what does this value chain do to the cost for the business? So if you're looking at a Walmart, if I'm looking at a Walmart, the inbound logistics is huge. So a part of the inbound logistics is supply chain management. Supply chain I think we have a degree, don't we? Supply chain management. I've had some people that have degrees. I don't know if UTSA has one. But if I'm working at H-E-B or Walmart, that's where I would start. How do we pick which farmers we're going to buy stuff from? How do we get it from their farm to our stores? Do we have a central area? Do we send trucks out to pick it up? How do we keep it fresh? What do we do with old products? Do we get any money off of them or just throw them out? Those are the kind of things we're asking. On the inbound side, that's huge for any type of retail operation. How they get their inventory is huge. You want to understand that. So you can, in ChatGPT, do supply chain management for your company. If they produce a product, they have raw materials. Now, if they're all service, there's probably not a supply chain management. So, but if you have a product, you have a service, you have a product that you're building something, then yeah, that inbound logistics, the supply chain is really, really important. Operations and outbound logic, if you're a store, that's your inventory management. That's how you train your employees, those type of things that are impacting how you get the product to the customer. Spend some time on their marketing and sales. One thing I think is really important in marketing and sales is how much does it cost them to acquire a customer? Peloton, their business breakdown is really interesting. They talk quite a bit about how they acquire a customer because Peloton spends a lot of money acquiring a product. I love how business breakdown talks about that acquisition cost. So, Peloton says, okay, it costs us $100 to get a new customer. We then sell them this bike. We make this much off the bike. And now we have these ongoing services, the software that they're buying. They have this monthly service that they're paying for. They break that down. How much does each of those cost? What's the margin on each one of those? So obviously customer acquisition, the margin is essentially zero. You're spending money to get people to think about buying the product, then you sell the product. Business breakdown does a great job of discussing that. So why do people go to Walmart? Is it TV ads? Is it other type of ads? Is it word of mouth? What are they doing? Get that to all work. Service. There's some firms that service is really huge because of the affinity. So some kind of luxury cars. I remember once, oh, I can't remember the car name, but they had a recall they had to do, and they decided that to make a great experience for their customer. It was like their customers were glad for the recall because they came back and got all these affinity. They spent a lot of money on that service. They wanted their customers thinking, wow, this is a really good deal. This is great. I'm never going to leave this customer again. That's kind of where USAA was, right? You know, really, really good service so the customer doesn't leave. They've lost some of that. Would you say that for Walmart? Any of y'all go to Walmart because of the great service? Probably not. So thinking those terms. So some firms are going to be extremely strong in some of these and weak in others. If you listen to the business breakdown for HelloFresh, their argument was they want to be Olympic in all of these categories. And what they argued was, if you got a sprinter who's running the Olympics, they may be great at everything, but they get a hamstring, well, they're not going to win. So their argument is you can't be weak on anything. And it's a really impressive business breakdown, really, really impressive, including even these support activities. You got to be strong in all of those areas. So I love business breakdown. I don't know how many of your companies you picked have a business breakdown, but I would recommend at least trying to find a company in your industry on business breakdown and just listen to how they talk about it. It's really, really, really good. But if you want a really good understanding of value chain, you might listen to the business breakdown for HelloFresh because they do go into that. He's actually talking his value chain and saying they want to be number one in everything. And then the pushback was, can you really be number one on everything? Because it's really expensive to be number one on these. And they had a really, really interesting conversation. All right, so y'all see Porter's value chain. Have y'all had Porter's value chain in any of your classes? You should start seeing it more and more and more. It's getting pretty critical. Have y'all seen this graph before? In some class, like in a strategy class, maybe? In strategy, yeah. So it's finance related as well. Finance uses this stuff. Focus on the customer. Start asking questions. So Alejandro, why do people walk into Target and not into Walmart? I do it because it's right there. So maybe location, or if I don't want to wait in line because the Target doesn't have any lines, there's no one in there, so it's kind of fast. Or if I don't, I don't know why Walmart has the ridiculously bright lights. You walk in, like you're walking into an operating room or something. It's unpleasant. It's just terrible. And Target's a little more pleasant. But why do people go to Target instead of going to Walmart? You think Walmart is because of price. So something you could do is go out and see how much cheaper is Walmart versus Target. If Walmart's 60% cheaper, what are people going to do? Target's out of business. Walmart's 2% cheaper. Target maybe has something, but why do you go to Target and pay 2% more? What is it that Target has? Is it the brands that they sell? Is the environment? So you got to figure that out if you're doing that. So look at the buyer. What is it that Target is doing for the buyer that Walmart's not, that they have that particular niche? Think about that with all of your companies. So Price Smart is a good example. Who was doing Price Smart? So Price Smart, why did they go to Price Smart instead of Costco? So that might be a geographic thing where they're located. But why is Price Smart so good where they are, and who are the competitors? Why is Costco so good? Does anyone go to Sam's anymore? I think they do. Yeah, they're still there. But Costco has the reputation for being the better run company. I don't know about the products and the prices. Is there a difference in price between Sam's and Costco, do you think?
There is. There's things that are cheaper at Sam's than there is at Costco, and then vice versa.
Yeah, switch back and forth.
It goes back to one thing that you mentioned last time was SKUs.
Yeah.
The type of SKUs and then what they control versus what's
Yeah, the SKUs is a big part of the inbound. You have fewer suppliers, you can have much more power over them. Walmart, I think, has like 40,000 SKUs versus 4,000 or whatever. I mean, it's a big difference, but Sam's is probably fewer SKUs, but it'd be interesting to compare those two. Yeah, so that's what you're after with this value chain. You're trying to define specifically who your company is. This doesn't apply to paper 2 so much, other than it'd be really helpful if you're thinking about this for your company, getting ready for paper 3, that gives you some information on the industry. How is it broken up? So Walmart's the low cost provider. Macy's is the top provider, whoever. I don't know who's on the top end because I never shop in those places, but where is Target? How does it fit in? It's a discount store, so it's a lower end, but it's more expensive. You're trying to fit your company in that. So why do people go to Target instead of, oh, what's the other company? Starts with a K.
Kroger.
Who?
Kroger.
No, I can't remember. But I don't shop much. I do all online. In fact, I've gotten to the point where I'm getting up to go shopping and I go, oh, I can just go to Amazon and I don't even go to shopping anymore. So, Kohl's, that's it. So why people go to Target instead of Kohl's? And you're trying to figure that out. You could stand out in front of them and say, hey, why are you going here? Why don't you go to Target? They may not let you do that very long. But that's the kind of thing you're trying to figure out. If you can't think of a reason why people go to Kohl's, that may be a firm going out of business. Why do y'all go to Kohl's? What do they have? I've been there once and I've never gone back.
That's it.
Are their clothes better than Target's? Cheaper, better selection, more expensive? Why do you go to Kohl's instead of Ross? Or TJX, right? TJX. So I've never been to TJX. I've been at Kohl's once. It's like, why am I in here? I can't find anything. So you're really trying to figure that out on your own without the hype of management. Why is this firm here and others aren't? It's really hard. And like 20 years ago, it was almost impossible in banking. We used to have 10 bankers come in to talk to us, dark blue suits, white shirt, red tie, every one of them. At the end of the day, we're like, I can't remember which one's which. And we would ask each one, well, why should you come to you instead of the others? And I said, well, we're just better. But how are you better? And they couldn't answer that question. And they kept hiring each other employees. So you see the same person in a different blue suit or same blue suit for a different company. So banking was just stuck in the middle. There was no differentiation. Now with all the mergers, you're starting to see who are the players and you're starting to limit that. So you got to ask that question, is there a differentiation in this industry? And try to figure that out. So you want to know for your company, but you also want to understand the industry. Who are the players? How do they fit in here? So the cost drivers, some of this overlaps with porters, but when you're talking about the cost drivers up here, you have economies or diseconomies of scale. Is being larger give you an advantage? Is being smaller give you an advantage? NVIDIA, its learning is huge. NVIDIA has a lot of institutional learning that gives them a huge advantage over their competitors. It's spillovers. Are there things you learned here that you can apply other places in the company? That's huge. Capacity utilization. Are they using that infrastructure efficiently? They don't have assets sitting there idle. And that's something, if I was looking at Valero, that'd be really important to have these massive, massive structures that are just these converting oil into gasoline for these refiners. How are they using it? How much capacity are they using? How much more capacity do they have? That's really important. Linkages between components, including suppliers and channels. How do you interact between the different departments? Interrelationships between departments, do they talk to each other? Vertical integration between suppliers and customers. Timing, do you want to be a first mover or do you want to let someone else go first and you come in afterwards? AI right now is a little bit of that, of people trying to figure out where do I want to be in this? What's the firm's policy? What about location? Are there institutional factors? If you're going to excel as a firm, you're going to have to spend more money. Where does that, how do you manage that? So he talks about these cost drivers. All right. So I can't give you much more on this other than I can assure you Wikipedia does a great job of value chain management analysis. So if you need more on that, you can do it. It's a little bit self-explanatory as you get into it. The challenge is it's a little bit different for every firm, how you apply it. Questions on that one? I want to spend mainly on your second paper.
What were diseconomies of scale?
Well, sometimes being smaller gives you an advantage. So you're closer to the customer, you're not quite so massive. You can specialize it to that customer. So yeah, I don't know if I can think of an example of that, but yeah, diseconomies of scale is just if you're massive, you're gonna lose some customers just because they won't more that specialized care. All right, fortified forces, make sure you know this before you graduate, extremely important. We use it all the time in finance. I was actually kind of shocked how often it comes up in finance, just all the time. And make sure before you start doing this as a team, you know what he's after. He's asking about industry attractiveness, which you could say that means profitability. I think it also relates to growth, but industry attractiveness. Is this an attractive industry to be in? Now, he's talking about it from the corporation standpoint. You're not going to look at it as an investor. Very, very similar, but he's talking to corporate managers, people managing businesses. And he's going to give you 5 forces to help them understand how to run their business better. But you as an investor, you want to know, is the industry I'm looking at, is this an attractive industry or is this an unattractive industry? Is it profitable? Is it underprofitable? Is it high growing? Is it slow growing? And so here's his 5 forces. The first one is threat of new entry. You also know this as barriers to entry. An industry is unattractive. It's easy for a new competitor to come in. So I used to think the auto industry was like that, and then Tesla showed up, and now you have these Chinese cars companies. So for some reason on the car side, new companies are coming in pretty quickly. Restaurants, pretty easy to enter in a restaurant. Some of y'all are doing restaurants. But the problem with restaurants, it's hard to enter restaurants around the country. You're going to start small and grow really slowly. So a new entrant's probably not going to be a threat for 10, 15, 20 years. But it is easy to enter a restaurant business, but most of them go out of business anyway. So yeah, you want to have the threat of new entries to be, you want it to be extremely difficult for a company to come into an industry. Let me bring up one point right now that is really important to me because I'm real picky on this. So something I don't want you to do, but it's really common for people to do. Let's say you're talking about buyer power. What I don't want you to do is say buyer power is strong. I hate that. So what does buyer power strong mean? Does that mean it's the buyers are powerful and so the industry is weak? Or does that mean the industry is strong because its buyers are weak? All right. You've seen that a lot, right? Buyer power is strong, supplier power is strong. I prefer this positive for industry, or even better, positive for industry growth or profitability. Make it real clear, it's buyer power positive for the industry or negative for the industry. If the buyers are really strong, that's negative for the industry. The buyers are really weak and diverse, and there's a lot of them. They don't have a lot of pricing sensitivity. That would be positive for the industry. All right, everybody understand that? Don't use the typical strong, buyer power strong, supplier power strong, supplier power weak. So here's where economy of scales come in. We'll talk about some of the ways. When we get into economic modes, we'll get into this a little more detail. How much rivalry is there within the industry? There's strong competition between players in industry. That is, well, I say that's weak, strong, say it's negative for the industry, positive for the industry. So if there's not much rivalry within the industry, that would be strong for the industry and positive. If there's a lot of rivalry, they're fighting for market share, that would be negative for the industry. And that's the key, is how are they fighting for market share? You know, restaurants are a good example. That's a lot of rivalry within industry and the restaurant side. How do you compete for market share? You cut your prices, you shrink your margins, and the last one standing wins. You try to put your competition out of business. It's interesting to me looking at the competition between Walmart and Dollar Tree and Dollar General. So who's winning right now? Walmart. Yeah, y'all saw that. Those that were here Wednesday. Well, y'all weren't here Wednesday. They were there Wednesday. Dollar Tree and what did Dollar Tree and Dollar General do this last week? They do well. Were you glad you were in these two stocks? That look good. And the headline said Dollar General, I think it's Dollar General, not Dollar Tree. Dollar General losing market share to Walmart. was the lead article. Did the market find that negative? We're up 35% in one day. You don't say, yeah, I lost a little money on Dollar General. No, you lost 30 of your money in one day. Is that rivalry or what's going on? What is Walmart getting right? It's interesting. So we got both Dollar General and Dollar Tree in here. I thought they were doing quite well because Walmart tried that smaller store space to try to compete with them, and it just didn't go very well. I've seen some of those smaller Walmarts. They look kind of strange to me, but they're kind of these neighborhood stores. But it looks like now Walmart is figuring out ways to help. Is it the curbside pickup? I doubt Dollar General is going to have curbside pickup because they only have one worker in the store anyway. They can't really ask that person to do much more. So it's interesting. I mean, Dollar General is going to try to do things like milk and meats. That sounds grotesque to me, but yeah, can you imagine how long that's going to sit on the shelf? They've been trying some things, but they're extremely successful there for several years. And then here recently, we're seeing a big challenge. So is that rivalry or is there something else going on? Is it consumer tastes are changing? Who knows what's going on? Supplier power. It's positive for the industry if the suppliers are extremely diverse. There's a lot of them. The firm has a choice. They can pick between one or the other. Suppliers don't have a lot of power. That would be positive for the industry. It's unattractive if the suppliers have power over the industry, maybe because they sell the one thing people need. So if you're doing electronic vehicles, that lithium batteries and what is it that Congo produces? I can't remember. Some of these precious earth things that are getting produced, there's places in the world that 80% of it's produced in that one country. That's not good for you. There can't be much choice. What's the EV industry doing? They're finding alternatives to those products, those supplies, so they can get around that concentration of power. So you have to ask the question, how many suppliers are they? How competitive are they on price? But then also ask, how important is that supply to your product? Right, those doing apparel, I forget so like Ross or whoever. I don't think Ross actually produces clothes. I think they buy them probably made, or do they? I don't know. But if you're producing like Nike producing shoes, you're buying a lot of cotton. So you want to try to figure out if Nike is buying cotton to make shoes, what percentage is cotton to the cost of a shoe? Is it 5%, 10%, 20%? You really want to try to figure that out. Business Breakdown does that great. No one in here has Chipotle. I'm surprised. What are the restaurants doing? I can't remember restaurants.
I don't know if Chipotle was it on there?
Was it on our buy list?
What was the companies y'all did then?
Wendy's.
Oh, Wendy's, that's
on
right.
there. Wingstop.
Wings. Okay, I can remember. Come back to me. So you really want to try to figure out what is the cost. Now you have it gets tough because if you look at Chipotle or Wendy's, they have a cost of goods sold. The accountants make this really messy. What's in that number? There's probably some employee time in that number, not just supplies. So you really want to understand if they sell a Wendy's hamburger for $6, how much of that is the bread, the meat, the toppings? Is that $1? Is that $2? And you have the paper goods, you got all this other stuff. You really want to try to figure it out. That Business Breakdowns does a great job of doing that. But it's hard to figure that kind of stuff out. You want to try your best to figure it out. But if there's one thing that's 10% of the product costs, you want to go out and look at who are the suppliers of that. What are those costs been doing recently? Is it concentrated one place in the world? Is it concentrated in one company? Those kind of questions you want to ask. We did for a while there, sugar was a big deal because sugar got real expensive because of what was going on in Brazil and some other countries. So Coca-Cola, the cost of the Coke went up because sugar prices went up so much, and they try to find some ways to get around it. We loved it in Costa Rica because we have several sugarcane farms, and those guys were doing great. But you have to ask that question. Starbucks, does Starbucks grow coffee? They have any farms? So they're buying coffee. Where are they buying coffee from? Colombia, hopefully from Costa Rica, but from Colombia. Where do they get their coffee? What's going on in those countries? Are they having some upheaval? Just things are falling apart. Those are kind of questions you have to ask. And then when you buy coffee from Starbucks, how much the cost of that cup of coffee is the coffee itself? What do y'all think? 20%, 5%, 30%. It'd be pretty important to understand. I don't buy coffee, so I don't know. So supplier power, there's quite a bit to do. Remember, in your second paper, you have to have some macro analysis. Supplier power will almost always have macro analysis in it. Also remember, I put labor under supplier power. So your employee base to me is supplier. So every project is going to talk about your employees. So if you're doing Wendy's, what might you be really concerned about? Maybe one minimum wage. What is minimum wage doing to Wendy's in California? Would be an interesting analysis to do. What have hamburgers prices done in California since the minimum wage increase? What is it now? $15 an hour or something? That's a pretty expensive employee for fast food. That can be supplier power. All right. So everyone's going to have, if you don't have a product where you're buying raw materials, talk about your labor under supplier power. If you're doing NVIDIA, none of you are doing NVIDIA, but if you have labor that is high skill, then your economic analysis can be on high skilled labor. So in the US, it's a big deal. You probably want to talk about immigration. In the US companies want to hire highly educated people from India and China and Russia, but there's limits. Like there's a 7% limit on any one country. We could hire a lot more people from India, but our government doesn't allow it. What does that do to NVIDIA? Do they open factories overseas so they can hire those people there? What are they doing to handle that? You're talking about the industry, not your company. That's really important in paper too. You're not talking about your company, but you got to think about your companies and what they're doing on those type of strategies. If you're doing Nike, you got to talk about sweatshops and those kind of things and what's going on in Indonesia and Nepal and Bangladesh. So put labor into supplier power. I consider that part of supplier power. Buyer power is you're looking at the buyer, you're looking at the customer. Can the customer dictate price, or they have high elasticity to demand, small price changes and they go somewhere else? That's not good. You want buyers that are just kind of buy without thinking. So we're going to talk about this on economic modes, but an important part on supplier power and buyer power is something called, you probably have heard this before. Have y'all heard switching costs? Is that a familiar term? So switching costs is how painful is it to switch to another supplier? So from supplier power, it's you as your industry, how difficult would it be for this industry to switch to another supplier? So there's one firm I heard on Business Breakdown, I can't remember the name of it, but it produces these massive machines to make semiconductor chips. And they dominate the industry. That's pretty bad for Intel and other, Taiwanese companies. They're the ones producing, and these things cost like $500,000, or maybe more, maybe millions of bucks. You buy one, it's going to be there for 40, 50 years. That's not good for this industry. They can't switch to someone else because there is no one else. So it's tough. One company, I can't remember the name of it, but it's the one that produces tasers for police officers. They dominate that market. Police departments have almost no other choice, but then they go to this company. That's bad. That's great for that company, that industry, but there's only one person in that industry. So switching costs is how difficult is it to switch? So let's talk about fast food. How difficult is it for a buyer to switch to another fast food company? Pretty easy. You might like In-N-Out burgers. I don't know why people do. I've never liked In-N-Out burgers. I kind of like Whataburger better, but if they double their prices, yeah, I'll go to In-N-Out burger instead of Whataburger. It's not that big a deal to switch. What about Pepsi versus Coke? The big deal. For some people it is. So there is brand. We'll talk about brand identity and brand loyalty. That's going to be a big part of that. And that is part of the buyer power. How loyal are they to brands, or they switch pretty easily? So switching costs. I remember at UTSA, we had an investment software package, and we were choosing between two products. One of them was slightly better, and the one we had was slightly worse. We decided to stick with what we have. Because why? Because the accountants were, we picked a new product, it's slightly better, and we've got 100 hours of transferring to the new system. We don't want to do that. That's overtime for us. Let's just change the analysis and make this, the one we have look better. And that was the kind of conversations they had because they were going to be spending massive overtime to switch. Adobe, someone's doing Adobe, right? I can't remember, Sasha, is that you? No. Okay. Denoska's doing Adobe. Adobe has a huge switching cost advantage because the people, desktop publishing, these are artists, they know Adobe, they don't want to switch, they keep using it. So that's why Adobe dominates that because their users don't want to switch. I don't ever use software like that. I do composing, I have composing software. If I switch to another provider, it's like I'm starting over from scratch. It's going to take me hours to figure out how to put up an eighth note on the staff. It's a pain. So switching cost is important for both supplier and buyer power. For your industry, you want to know how easily the industry can switch those suppliers. How integrated is that supplier into their process? For buyers, you want your buyers to be desperate for your product. They don't want to switch to someone else because it messes things up. A good example of this is Oracle. Most firms use Oracle, although there's no question they have some competition with CRM coming in. But Oracle, they're the go-to accounting. If you're a procurement person, you can use Oracle or you can use this new company that started up. If you mess up and you buy the new company, you're in a lot of trouble. If you buy Oracle, you're not going to lose your job because that's safe. It's a safe bet. That's that switching cost. So think through that. That applies to some of your industries quite a bit. And that falls under both supplier and buyer power. The other thing on buyer power is if your ultimate customer is retail, you need to start thinking demographics. So who is the ultimate product here? So you might make EV batteries. So maybe your buyer is GM, but ultimately your buyer is the retail person buying the car. You need to go out to that ultimate buyer. What is that demographic? Who's buying EVs right now? What's the demographics of that? What's the age group? What countries are they in? So if you're kind of, there's an in-between retailer that's buying your product, go to the very end customer. Demographics is the easiest thing to get data on. How many 20-year-old women are there? How many 40-year-old men are there? It's pretty easy to get data on that. You can get it by country as well. If you're doing Facebook or any kind of social media, you can figure out who are the users and what is that demographic, how is it growing. So in buyer power, a good economic analysis to do is on the demographics of the ultimate buyer. There may be some exceptions if you're Lockheed and your ultimate buyer is the U.S. military. Yeah, it doesn't quite work. I hope they're not selling to retail consumers out there. So maybe not everyone has a retail buyer at the end, but I think most of your firms ultimately have some retail person out there. Buyer power is also a good place. We talked about it before. Let's start thinking about. You might watch this video, not the book. He has a book. I should get that book. I've got like 10 credits on Audible, and I can't think of what I want to buy. I bought like 6 last month. I have a bunch, but it's only an hour long. So when you're at the gym on the treadmill, he's really, really good at this. Where is your industry in its life cycle? Is it on the way up? AI just starting out. It's on the way out. Where is your industry? You want to understand that because where you're under life cycle is going to define the growth. And I put that under buyer power. So you might have a discussion about the life cycle of your firm. He's a great lecturer, really, really good. I love this. Growing up is hard to do. Growing hard. So he makes some pretty good jokes. He talks about some of these senior citizen firms that are trying to be cool and hip and trying to look like a teenager. And he says it's pathetic. What does that mean? And talk about some of these young firms trying to be mature. What does that mean? That's a young firm taking on a lot of debt. You don't do that. So he keeps it humorous, but it's really insightful. He gives you some good ideas. He may get you a good way to think about your buyer because ultimately, this where you are in the cycle is where your firm hits the buyer. All right. So I recommend this, not necessarily this one. He has several videos like this. This one looks pretty good. Now I'm really interested to go buy his book, so I might do that. You? The corporate life cycle. I don't see the date. I don't know the date. I have to look for it. It may not be on Audible. It could be on Audible and he reads it. That'd be even better. Because, it's kind of makes it sound better. You hear his voice that we're so accustomed to. Right. So threat of new entrants. Some of y'all, like on restaurants, you can hit that pretty quickly. Others, if you have massive economies of scale, you probably need to talk about the economies of scale. So Intel has a huge advantage on threat of new entrants because those fabrication plants are really expensive. They're spending billions of dollars. While we're within the industry, you should think about it, go through it. That makes sense. All of you are going to do supplier and buyer power and pretty detailed there. All right. So you can hit that pretty hard. So if you have 3 team members, make sure you do supplier and buyer power, and you're going to pick one other orders that you need to talk through. Make sure you hit those 2, always important. And then I left threat of substitutes out of there. I'll talk about that later, but threat of substitutes is the last one. Threat of substitutes is often one that you just ignore. It doesn't apply to all industries. Like restaurants, what's the threat of substitute? Restaurants are obviously eating at home, but that's so obvious. You're not really helping the reader. It's like, yeah, I can make my own food. Is HelloFresh a threat to restaurants? Yeah, but you can hit it really fast and get off. It's just so obvious that's the case. If you wanted to me, that's more under buyer power. So are consumers doing more meals at home, delivery? Are they still eating out in restaurants? I would put that under buyer power rather than under threats of substitutes. Okay, that makes sense. Is that kind of logical? So threat of substitutes. Yeah, I mean, almond milk is a threat to milk. You can think about these artificial meats, a threat to meat, but those are so obvious. So threat of substitutes, I don't think it's going to be a major one for most of you. All right, why am I showing you this? I hate this. Don't put this in your paper. To me, it's confusing because I had to look at it and go, wait, is the line further out good for the industry or bad for the industry? Is 0 mean buyers have a lot of power or little power? If 5 means I have a lot of power, that's bad for the industry. I'm spending 40 minutes just trying to figure out this chart. And some students put the chart in exactly out as Merchant Online shows it, which means it's not even their chart. It's Merchant Online's chart. So why give me someone else's analysis? If that's the case, I can fire you and just use Merchant Online, right? I don't need to pay you a salary to copy and paste from someone else's work. I don't like these charts. I hate them. If you want to find another way to do it, that's fine. Create your own chart. Use green that is positive for the industry, red that is negative, and you want to put it on a scale, for buyer power, while the green's way out here, but on supplier power, it's a little orange, and you could do that. I don't know who created this. I hate it. I have at least 20% of students put it in their paper, and it's just like, don't do that to me. I don't like that at all. Anybody want to defend this? Y'all have seen this before, haven't you? People use it all the time. I just think it's terrible. This was for the insurance market. This is the banking market. So this is my preferred way of doing it. Orders, 5 forces, you have them in there. You have some key. So this is the summary, right? You're going to have the entire thing written out. What are the key issues in there? And is it positive or negative for industry? So what you could do is maybe grade this a little bit more. Is it very positive, kind of indifferent, weak, and negative, very, very negative? You can certainly do that. And look what way I worded it. Impact not on industry profitability. I put impact on industry growth. I tend to think of it more the industries that are growing faster are attractive versus profitability, but you could do it either way. So this could be the last thing that you show. I don't remember what company it is. Oh, this is DRAM and NAND. I think I might have copied this out of a student's paper, actually. This might be, I can't remember which paper this was. So I think I copied this out one of the papers and put it in there. I'd made one in class where I just made up stuff off the top of my head, so it wasn't very well written. So supplier power is negative, concentrate suppliers with high industry switching costs. So there's few suppliers, and even if a new supplier came along and it costs you a fortune to switch because it's so integrated into what you're doing. And then an overall assessment at the very, very end. I like this. It's a good chart. gives you everything you need in one place. You can use more words if you want to here. You can make this a little more detailed if you need to, but right. So Fortis forces, are you ready to go on that? Let Apple IQ, Chat GPT help you on that. All right, so I left threat of substitute. So anyway, one other way you can think about this from a threat of substitutes, you can think much broader than threat of substitutes and think about the entire industry. It's something called, see if you've heard this before, disruptive innovation. Does that term sound familiar to you? So who's the big creator of this? It's Christensen. He passed away a few years, man. All these really famous people have been passing away here recently. Y'all know Markowitz passed away last year. I think James Simons passed away recently, didn't he? And it's just amazing. And a lot of them are passing away because they're in my presentations. So there seems to be a correlation between my presentations and life expectancy. But Clayton Christensen, an exceptional writer. This is his best book. It's very dated. It's very old. But it's the theory. The theory is still current. What's old is he gives the theory, and the theory is really well done, and then he does industry examples. And the industry examples are probably a little bit too dated. You should still read them. It's not a lengthy book. He's a good writer. He doesn't write overly technically. But what he means by seeing what's next is how can you see a disruptive innovation coming in? How can you see something that's going to come in and wipe out an entire industry? How could Blockbuster have seen Netflix? How could Walmart have seen Amazon? How can you see these things coming? And what he does, he has a template for questions you can ask, things you can see that an industry is being taken over. He gives an example, a really old one of the telegraph. And people say, well, the telegraph company is, well, the Western Union, they had the option to buy Alexander Bell's invention. They said, we're not going to do that. People aren't going to talk on this phone thing. That's stupid. Telegraph. And he makes an argument that was actually a wise decision given what they knew. They had so much invested in the telegraph. There's a lot of new innovations there. It was really, really coming along really well. The telephone was going to take all this infrastructure. They weren't even sure people would want to do that. From what Western Union still exists, so obviously it's a pretty interesting firm. Their thought was, this doesn't make sense for us. And it was the right decision. And a lot of times the right decisions is what puts you out of business. They had so much invested in that existing infrastructure, they couldn't be distracted. That's where the profitability came from. And they saw the telephone came in, it was just going to take away profit from the telegram. They're going to be distracted, they're going to have to do all this new stuff. So he makes an argument, it made sense given the data they had, and they still got wiped out. So he's giving you some really, really good tools. It's a pretty good template, pretty simple template of questions you can ask. And I do like the chapters on the industries because one of them in education, I hope education gets disrupted. I hope we radically change how universities work. I'm the old fogey that wants y'all here in person, but how is this going to change? I'm kind of thinking maybe universities should switch, that we do the flipped classroom. Have y'all heard the flipped classroom? So all your lectures you do outside of class, and in class is projects, it's hands-on stuff. So this lecture is all online, but we still meet in person and build stuff. So instead of listening to me drone on, you listen to Dan and Darren, and then you come in here and my job is to help you implement what he said. I don't know what's going to be in the next. I was thinking we're moving more and more online at UTSA anyway, but I can't park anywhere. So obviously someone's coming to campus. So something's happening. So he talks about education being disrupted, and it needs to be disrupted. He talked about telecommunications being disrupted, and it has been disrupted. No question on that. So I do recommend his book. He has a few other books out there. He has one interesting one asking how can you use a theory of disruptive innovation for your personal life. So it's his book. I read that one. It's kind of a strange book, but how can you can watch for disruptive innovations in your own life. So rather than thinking about threats of substitutes, start thinking about industries that are going to come in and completely wipe your industry out. Now, can that happen with restaurants? Probably not. Could that happen with IMAX? IMAX, it's the experience of being in that big room. Can you replicate that somewhere else? Could someone else do that? I'm not talking about a new competitor coming in and doing it better. That's not substitution. I'm talking about a whole new industry coming in. So Blockbuster is a good example, going from disc and going to online streaming. You know, when Netflix started, not to give Hiram some of my biases on Netflix. What is it? Look at the name of this company. Net means what? Internet. Internet movies. When did Netflix come up with this name? When it was doing nothing but box, disc and VHS. How forward thinking was this firm? Netflix for a firm that did nothing on the internet. That's pretty impressive, right? So Blockbuster didn't catch on to that. Could Blockbuster have done online streaming? They could have gotten that business, but they were just not thinking that. Why? Because they had so much invested in what they're doing. It was working. Why get distracted? So those type of innovation, and if you look at Blockbuster, especially, their stock was doing great right before the fall. It wasn't like this trickle down. They were doing great, and then off the charts. And just have any of y'all ever been to a Blockbuster? Yeah, a couple of y'all have. Yeah, I look too young to have gone to a Blockbuster. You remember that experience? It seems crazy today, doesn't it? The day you click on Netflix, it's like, I watch 10 minutes of it. You go to Blockbuster, you're going to watch the whole thing because you went through all the trouble to go get it. So it's a very different experience. All right. I do have some articles I could probably show you, but I won't put those out there. All right, all right. You might think this has nothing to do with paper 2, but these generic strategies are important because he's talking about cost leadership and differentiation. What you want to do this in your paper 3 on your company, but you also want to think about this on paper 2. Does your industry have a cost leader? And if your industry is dominated by differentiators, how do they differentiate themselves? So that's where we'll go next and break that up. Any questions? This weekend is really important. You got to get this paper 2 going, get your team organized, decide who's going to do buyer power, who's going to do supplier power, who's going to do the introduction for the industry. Start getting organized, start getting stuff together. So get your team organized. You're all meeting as a team. This weekend's really critical. Don't let this weekend go because you're going to run out of time. All right, we'll end it there.